Hello and welcome to the channel. Today's something a little bit new, a little bit of a tester. So as all the reviews are nearly done, I think there's just a flyer left to do, and all the update rating videos are going to filter out over the next upcoming weeks. Now I've already done the HQ update video and the Elite update video with the summary, so check those out if you haven't already. We're basically updating the Planet 40k ratings based upon new metas and simply because new codexes have since been released. So some units are better than they were and others are worse. As for today's video, a lot of people have been asking to do a list building video, and in particular at the 1000 point level. So I thought we'd give that a go. So we will be building a 1000 point list towards the end of the video. I'll put a timestamp in the description if you want to just skip straight ahead to that. But first we're going to be talking about the problems that Necron players face when building a 1000 point list. Now Necrons are pretty difficult to build a list around at 1000 points, as we've got quite pricey HQs. And our heavy support options are unfortunately not as good as other faction heavy supports. And we've only got a few which are actually that good. Although that's a complete different argument entirely. Some do like the Doomstalker and the Doomsday Art options, but realistically they aren't as good as other factions. The amount of hits being very hit and miss, and the damage also not getting what others seem to be getting with the D3 plus 3 damage. We just have D6. Our Locust Destroyers, although they are loved by some players, are wildly too pricey and they're not exactly eradicators, are they? So we suffer from our big weapons department, and we try to compensate it by the majority of us heading over to our melee based dynasties such as Novak, where we've got access to lots of chopper units, particularly from the elites area of the Codex. Then this has a domino effect, as it either needs us to spend CP on double detachments or getting a vanguard detachment, as there's only 2 elite slots if you're playing a patrol detachment at 1000 points. So already we're running into a few problems that other factions tend to not run into, being that you've got pricey HQs, poor heavy support choices, and not really enough elite slots to compensate for those lack of heavy support options. So when we start to build a list, some of you already know the dynasty, whether it's the Mefrit dynasty, the Novak dynasty, or a custom dynasty, or one of the others. We already know the rough feel of your list. I personally play a bit more openly and chop and change game to game, partly due to lack of games within the COVID lockdowns, so play testing for reviews and whatnot is something I need to be constantly doing. So you kind of need to work out right from the get-go your most expensive units that you 100% want in the field in a given game. So some examples of this would be, say, a Catan Shard. That's over a third of your entire 1000 points if you go one of those 3 named Catans. It's a pricey investment, especially at this level, but your opponent isn't likely to have something big and powerful enough to deal with such a model, as most players tend to spread their 1000 points as thin as possible to get as many units on the board as possible. So this could be a solid plan. Those Catan Shards in general are quite boss as well. Now I've had a 1500 point game recently, and within 3 turns a Nightbringer single-handedly took out a Fate Weaver, a Demon Prince and a Soul Grinder, which was about 550 points and still had about 4 wounds left in the tank. It was already game over. Now you do have the bigger Catans such as the Tesseract Bolts, but you will be paying command points to do that. Your HQ is of course the next big decision which you need to be making. You kind of have a few directions to go with this. Do you want a Noble for the command protocols? Do you want a Resurrection Orb? If both of those answers are yes, then you're either going to be going for one of the many Overlords, a Command Barge, or just a basic Necron Lord. I always stick in an Overlord in the list just for now, just so I know I'm going to have to need to invest roughly that sort of points into the list. Then I can come back later and fine tune the exact selection and war gear. So at this point I skip on to the pricier units, and I'll be coming back to the HQs later. But without fully knowing what other units I'm going to be putting in, there's no point really looking at the support characters just yet. So if your answer was no to the Noble unit and the Resurrection Orb, then what do you want? Do you want a choppy HQ, a cheap HQ? If you are going choppy, then you're likely going down the line of a Scorpec Lord, a Locust Lord, or maybe you could still take a Command Barge. If you are going cheap or just a Warlord that's a supporting character, then I guess you're taking a Cryptek. Again, whoever you pick is just a generic option for now, so just stick somebody in and you return to it when you've done the rest of the list. Or if it is a pricier unit such as Luminazares, then put him in now, as obviously it's going to be a little bit more pricier. So this is the part, if you are taking an expensive unit such as a Catan, this is where it goes in, or anything else that's a large investment. So if you are building a list, say around a 10-man Lich Guard unit as a focal point, then now is probably the time to put them in right at the beginning. Maybe it's a Lich Guard unit, maybe it's 20 warriors, anything that's sort of 200 points or more, I'd put it in at the beginning because you don't have much wiggle room at 1000 points. So this is the part where a lot of people branch off into their own way, partly due to the Dynasty Code, partly due to the selection of the Warlord. So those who have selected a Noble or maybe a Resurrection Orb, you'll very likely want to have 20 warriors, as that's the best combination, whether you're using it with My Will Be Done or the Lord's Will. They of course work with all the core units, but warriors are what I'd class as a go-to unit in this situation. The choppy HQs have less of a synergy with other units, so are less of a thing that you need to think about. Cryptek, however, is a big question mark, as each synergizes with a lot of different units within different ways. A Chronomancer giving invuns and reroll charge rolls is a huge deal for Lich Guard, especially the variant carrying a War Scythe, so if you invested in 10 of those, you're likely going to need to get them in. That's just one combination. I mean, you do have Night Scythes and other sorts of ways to get in, such as a Veil of Darkness relic, but really I'd use a Chronomancer for that. A Technomancer can buff almost anything. If you're going down the more Canoptic route, then the Control Node may be a good shout for your backlines, or the Canoptic Cloak for maybe a unit of Scorpet Destroyers to be healing those guys up. Or if you wanted to just sit back and babysit some warriors, you've still got the Rites of Reanimation ability. So the other two generic Cryptex aren't really buffing your units, but if you wanted to go down that route, it's a cheap HQ selection. It's more like a sacrificial one though. Another supporting cast member is the Royal Warden. Again, works really well with those warriors, especially in the Mephit Dynasty. While carrying the Veil of Darkness relic, getting 20 warriors in, carrying some Reapers. They'll get an extra 3-inch range with a Dynasty code taking them to range 15. And you'll have 40 shots at strength 5, minus 2 AP and 1 damage, possibly minus 3 AP later when you get them at half range. Then of course if they get charged, he can use his adaptive strategy ability to pull them out of combat so that they can keep firing their weapons. If you are able to Mind Will Be Done them before using that Veil of Darkness, then they're going to be hitting on 2s too. So for sure that's going to be deleting units. So once you've selected your unit and maybe a supporting character, rinse and repeat for as many of these combos as you want to add. So at this point in your build, you've decided on a Warlord, maybe even decided on 2 or even 3 HQ slots to support the other units, and you've also selected those units that can take up a large amount of your list. Now I quite like a balanced list. Even if I know who I'm up against, I try not to tailor lists unless both players are agreeing to that. So I try to presume I've got no idea what I'm going up against. But for me, I like balance, I like a bit of defense, offense, point scoring units, and to maybe have some sort of board control, all while synergizing as much as I possibly can. Let's say I went with those 10 Lich Guards. At 1,000 points, I'd say, okay, I've got my in-your-face melee guys, I've got a Chronomancer to get them there, now I need units that are going to stay in my deployment zone, maybe even score me points in my home objectives. So now you can go one of many ways. You're either looking at heavy supports that tend to not move with the Necrons, so your Doomsday Arcs or your Doomstalkers. You can even go infantry tanky, such as Immortals with their 3+ save and toughness 5. Pretty cheap at 85 points for 5 models and still fire at 30-inch range, 33 with the Mephit Dynasty. Or you can go cheap and really annoying and take Scarabs. They're one of the best units in the book, and I'll repeat what I've said a few times in the comments. They were 100% supposed to be in the top 10 Necron video we did. They were in the list I made, but for some unknown reason, they didn't make the video. Anyway, these things score you tons of victory points. They're only 45 points for a minion unit of 3, which totals 12 wounds. Now, not only that, they're almost flat, so you're getting barely any line of sight of them because they're quite difficult to see, especially with terrain around. I'd highly advise you taking a unit for scoring. You could even go full on with them and take a unit of 9 of them at 135 points. That's 36 wounds defending objectives. Get a Chronomancer, put a 5+ in-one save on them and ouch. Or go with either the Nephit Dynasty or Unyielding from the custom dynasties to give them a 6+ in-one save. Even using the Nihilak code works really nice, giving them objectives secured. So no matter how many you take, they're always worth it. So you choose who you want to score your home victory points with, and each option comes with its own pros and cons. The Doomsday Ark and the Doomstalkers, okay, it's like 2 birds with 1 stone. They provide the big guns at a large range and they're scoring you points, but if they aren't defended well, then they are vulnerable to melee, as they can't fire blast weapons into combat and they obviously don't fight very well, and those Gorse weapons won't really be doing much damage. Immortals are tanky and can use the cover, can fire at a reasonable range and get 2 attacks each, so aren't a straight pushover in melee. As mentioned, they are cheap at 85 points, so although it's not a big gun option, you're saving points by not having to buy a 190 point Doomsday Ark. Then we've already mentioned the Scarabs, super cheap, super resilient, do a slight bit of damage but not too much. Alternatives include the Canoptic Spiders to synergize with the Scarabs, maybe a Technomancer, Deathmark similar to Immortals, but they're in the elite slots. They can snipe characters that are sitting on objectives with their toughness 5. Locust Destroyers, we've mentioned, are probably way too pricey at the moment. The heavy version is a cheap way of getting a strength 10 shot in, but it's only 1 shot, so it's pretty pricey. Then the last option at this stage is a Triarch Stalker. Now our version of a Dreadnought, although its melee is only strength 7, so it's not really competing with other Dreadnoughts that are strength 10 or 12 or even 14. So you pick some backline point scorers, and maybe you've already dived into a little bit of anti-tank at the same time, but now you're already looking near that 1000 point mark. So I'm going to show you a mock list. I'm not really suggesting this is some sort of tournament list, but it gives you an idea of how a balanced list looks like at a 1000 point mark. So for this list, I'm going to be planning on taking a Nightbringer, so I'm going to be putting that straight into my list builder straight away, and I'll fine tune his Catan powers later on. As this is a 1000 point list, I can't really go too heavy on the Warlord, especially since I've already invested 370 points into a Nightbringer. So I'm going to take a Necron Lord, I'll put him in now, and we'll deal with all the Warlord traits and potential relics later. Taking a Lord not only opens the door for a Resurrection Orb, but it's also a needed noble unit for command protocols. As for the big focus unit, I'm going to go with a 20-man warrior unit, knowing I can put a Resurrection Orb on my Necron Lord. So it's 260 points worth of investment for those warriors, but I'm thinking this is my stay back and shoot unit. Not sure on the weapon type yet, I'll revisit this when I get back to it. Now that I know my Lord and my warriors are pretty much standing side by side in the back lines, it's time to add that resurrection orb to the Lord, making him a total of 100 points. I'm not going to be putting any melee weapons on him, I'm just going to keep him as stock with the Staff of Light for now. To keep these guys protected from any melee deep strikers, I'm going to need a second HQ support character, which is going to be the Royal Warden. Hidden in amongst a 20-man strong warrior unit with a Necron Lord will allow them to fall back out of combat and still shoot the threat. This simple synergy took out a Bloodthirster in a previous battle, so I'm going to be going with this. So that's the 2 HQs selected and a troop choice selected. So if I was doing a patrol detachment, it is now legal. Of course I've got the Catan Shard in there as well. Already I'm only left with 195 points still to spend, so now I need to take a step back and look at what is missing. So I've got Warriors and HQ staying back, Catan Shard going forward. So I need some sort of support for the Catan Shard, something else to score points maybe, as the Catan Shard needs to be slicing things up, not really worrying about trying to score points. So I kind of need a second distraction unit that will sort of get into my opponent's line to make them play more defensively. So the Ophidian Destroyers come to mind with their tunneling ability to come in from turn 2 with a fair amount of attacks. It's 105 points for a min unit of 3. More of a glass hammer distraction, but if they can take something out on entry then great. If they can't, then they may have bought the Catan Shard a bit more time to get in. Now I'm only left with 90 points at this stage, I'm still short of point scoring units. And as we mentioned, there is one perfect unit in the Codex, which is the Scarab. So 6 Scarabs is actually bang on 90 points. Ideally I would like 2 units of 3, but with the Ophidian Destroyers unit taking up a fast attack slot, it would mean I need to find a way to separate the detachment, which is possible if I place all 3 elites along with one of the HQs into a Vanguard detachment, but it's going to cost me 3 command points to do so. So it is a decision I need to make, but I'm going to be keeping them as a 6 model swarm and keep my command points for stratagems later in the game. So that's all the units in place. I now need to fine tune the Warlord and the Catan Shard and select the warrior weapons, and of course what am I going to do about the Dynasty. For the Dynasty I'm going to go custom with this. Pitiless Hunters to get the max shots at rapid fire range with those warriors, even at full range, which kind of selects my warrior weapons for me, which is going to be the Gorse Flayers. Pair this with Isolationist for a +1 strength when firing within 12 inches. The Catan powers kind of depend on who you're against. Now I played demons like I mentioned, so a lot of individual big monsters. So Sky of Falling Stars was the go-to for me, which I could target 3 monsters all with D3 mortal wounds each turn. Against a more traditional list, Antimatter Meteor could be better, but this is only 1000 points. So likely your opponent is going to be bringing min units, so I'm going to put Sky of Falling Stars in again. The Necron Lord not only needs a trait, but he's going to need a relic. So Necron Wall of Traits are pretty terrible in general. I don't plan on separating my Lord with the Warriors, so it's either between Enduring Will, which probably won't make any difference, or Inspiring Leader from the core rulebook to give +1 to their leadership to nearby core units. Now it could slightly assist on the morale tests if the Warriors were focused on. Neither are ideal traits really, but I'll go with the one from the main core rulebook just in case. As for the relic, I'm going to go with the Orb of Eternity relic for the Lord, so I can get my guys up on a 4+ if their numbers are whittled down. I also want to put a relic on the Royal Warden. It's going to cost me 1 CP to do that, so I'm going to give him the Veil of Darkness relic. Again, could be used to bait my opponent into screening areas off the board from turns 1, 2 and 3, because they're not going to want 20 warriors getting too deep into their lines. For me it's more of an emergency button if I needed it, or use the orb in the command phase and then Veil of Darkness away in the movement phase late game. Could get me on a key objective, or with my guys being core and objective secured, it's worth a punt at 1 CP. So that's the 1000 point list. As mentioned, this isn't something you go into a major tournament with, just more of a list building idea, which I've sort of done on the fly for a standard game. You're not going to have many units, but nor is your opponent. It's only 1000 points. And that Catan Shard is going to be causing mayhem, I can guarantee that. Guys, I'd love to hear some of your lists in the comments below. Can be any dynasty, any units within the Codex, 1000 points. Also let me know whether it's a narrative list, a competitive list, or just a regular match like my one is. It would be great for all of us to check out some lists from others in the community. Also like the video if you like this sort of content. This is a new idea. I've got lots of other ideas that I would like to dive into, so give me some feedback if you can. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.